You think you could survive a day in ancient Rome? Think again. No morning alarms, just the sunrise telling you when to get up. No coffee runs, no cozy sweatpants. Instead, you're wrapped in a toga, navigating a world where status dictates everything. And if you're unlucky, your own father might have the legal right to decide whether you live or die. Life in Rome wasn't just demanding, it was relentless. Strict routines, brutal entertainment, and a society built on hierarchy and obedience. So today let's dive into a typical Roman day and compare it with modern life. And by the end, you might wonder how anyone survived at all, because let's be real, you wouldn't last an hour, let alone a full 24. Every morning in ancient Rome before the trials of the day began, the youngest members of society engaged in a small but powerful ritual. They adorned themselves with a protective amulet. Today's kids wake up to cartoons and sugary cereals. Roman children? They reached for protective amulets to ward off unseen dangers. For boys, this amulet was a bulla, a locket-like charm suspended around their neck, and for girls, it was a lunula, fashioned in the pleasing shape of a crescent moon. Instead of seatbelts and baby monitors, ancient parents relied on symbolic talismans to shield their young. A common design on these amulets was the phallus. Borrowed from ancient Greek culture, the phallic motif was believed to ward off malevolent forces and danger. These amulets were not mere decorative trinkets. They were considered vital tools meant to safeguard the wearer from harm throughout an arduous day. Whether worn around the neck or carried in a tiny leather pouch, these objects served as early symbols of protection and perhaps even destiny. So in a society where invisible threats and adverse fates loomed large, the bulla and lunula offered comfort and a tangible reminder that one was under the watchful care of both family and ancestral belief. So instead of seatbelts and baby monitors, Romans trusted phallic charms and crescent moons to keep their kids safe. Thus, the thought of waking up every morning and relying on an amulet for protection would be unimaginable for most modern souls. Next, family life in ancient Rome was defined by a rigid patriarchy, where the eldest male, the family patriarch, wielded nearly absolute power over every aspect of his family's existence. Modern parents make rules against screen time, but Roman fathers decided on matters of life and death. From birth until death, the patriarch was the ultimate decision-maker with authority that spanned from matters of property to the very survival of his offspring. Today, disagreements in marriage might lead to separation, but in Rome, they led to woman's execution. So in this society, the patriarch not only had the power to divorce his wife if she was unfaithful, but he could also even order her death. Which means husbands didn't just make the rules, they were the law. And wives, they obeyed. Likewise, the control extended to children as well. Men possessed the right to decide if a newborn baby should live or be put to death. Infanticide was widespread throughout the empire, and the decision was often made on the basis of how many children already existed in the family or because of the baby's sex. Female infants in particular were at risk of being killed, all according to the volatile discretion of the household patriarch. Meanwhile, the wife of the patriarch was expected to manage the household. Her role required absolute loyalty, as she was expected to support her husband's decisions and maintain the domestic homefront at all costs. Although Roman women were later granted certain rights, such as owning property, they were never permitted to hold political office or challenge the authority that defined family life. This structured hierarchy within the home underscores a larger truth. In ancient Rome, the family was both a microcosm of the state and an institution that ensured order through domination. The cruelty of such a system is not lost on us today, and it is one of the many reasons why surviving even a single day in ancient Rome might prove too much for a modern millennial. Moreover, if we talk about a typical day in ancient Rome, it began with the first meal of the day known as the ientaculum. This early breakfast was modest, often consisting of cheese, fresh fruit, and possibly leftovers with bread playing a central role. Although it was merely a light meal to fuel the day ahead, each bite carried the weight of tradition and necessity. Today, breakfast is rushed between emails and news updates, but in Rome, it was a quiet ritual, rooted in necessity rather than indulgence. Following the breakfast ritual, The hours leading up to noon were reserved for a vital exchange of social obligation known as salutatio. In this customary practice, individuals of lower social status visited the homes of higher status patrons, or patroni. Nowadays, a favor can be requested with a quick text or email, but in Rome, you had to show up in person, in a toga, ready to prove your loyalty. In the atrium of the patron's home, these lower-class individuals paid their respects and sought assistance. In return, the patron bestowed small gifts or a sportula, a basket filled with food or money, reinforcing the strict social hierarchy that defined Roman society. Every gesture and word during these interactions was carefully measured. Attending a salutatio was not merely about receiving tangible benefits, but about solidifying one's place in the intricate web of patronage that governed Roman life. By contrast, modern social interactions emphasize independence and personal choice. Today, career paths are built through education, networking, and skill development, but back then survival depended on securing the favor of a powerful patron. So clearly, unlike Rome, where social status determined survival, people today are far less reliant on a single individual's goodwill. And the thought of waking up every morning to prove loyalty for financial security would be unbearable for most modern people. In ancient Rome, clothing was more than just a necessity. It was a statement of identity, status, and citizenship. And no garment embodied this more than the toga. Today, we throw on jeans, t-shirts, or whatever feels comfortable. In Rome, dressing meant wrapping yourself in an 18-foot toga, hoping it stayed in place throughout the day. However, not everyone had the privilege of wearing it. Only Roman citizens were allowed to don a toga, making it a powerful symbol of exclusivity. This massive piece of fabric wasn't simply draped over the body. It had to be carefully folded and arranged, requiring both skill and patience. No zippers, no buttons, no shortcuts, just layers of fabric and the effort to make sure every fold was perfect. For ordinary citizens, a plain white toga was standard, but those in positions of power wore versions accented with a purple stripe, indicating their rank and influence. The emperor, however, stood apart. His toga was entirely purple, a visible declaration of absolute authority. Today, clothes reflect personality and personal choice. In Rome, they broadcasted your social rank, and even the slightest mistake in draping could be seen as disrespectful. Additionally, togas played an important role in daily formalities such as the salutatio, where both patrons and clients were seen wearing it as they met in Roman homes. In these interactions, the toga was not merely a uniform, it was a display of honor and status that reinforced the hierarchical structure of Roman society. Citizens wore it with pride, aware that the garment was a marker of their hard-won rights and responsibilities. In contrast, modern fashion values comfort, practicality, and individuality. Imagine having to drape an 18-foot toga every morning, adjusting every fold, just to prove your citizenship. For people used to convenience, this level of effort would be unthinkable. Unlike our modern world, where watches and iPhones define our schedules, Romans relied on the natural movements of the sun to measure time. You check your Apple Watch. Romans watched the sun. They did not have instruments capable of dividing a full 24-hour cycle. Instead, they used the position of the sun in the sky and sundials to split the daylight into 12 equal segments known as horae. Because the length of daylight varied with the season, so too did the length of a Roman hour, shorter in winter and longer in summer. Thus, an hour wasn't a fixed 60 minutes. It stretched and shrank depending on the season. Additionally, the day in Rome was anchored around three key moments: sunrise, noon, and sunset. These benchmarks dictated the rhythm of Roman life, guiding everything from the start of morning rituals to when social visits began. Forget your 9 to 5. Romans had sunrise to sunset. Their schedules adapted with the changing seasons. No Google Calendar, just guesswork. And beyond these natural markers, any further division of the day was made within the intervals set by sunrise and noon or noon and sunset. Similarly, the night was divided into 12 equal parts, though measured far less precisely than daylight hours. For Romans, Time was a fluid, seasonally adjusted measure, rather than the constant mechanical precision we take for granted today. The reliance on natural lighting and sundials imbued their day-to-day existence with a deep connection to the rhythms of nature. This method of timekeeping shaped their schedules, their work, and their leisure, locking them into a timeless cycle dictated by celestial movements rather than human invention. As far as education is concerned, in ancient Rome, it started at home, shaped largely by tradition and family status. Today, education is structured and available to all, but back then learning depended on wealth, gender, and whether your father thought it was necessary. Boys were taught to read, write, and study Roman law, history, and physical training, all essential for future citizenship and military service. Their education focused on discipline, obedience, and respect for authority. Girls, however, mostly learned household skills like weaving, with basic literacy as an afterthought. They learned from their mothers, mastering domestic tasks that prepared them to run a household. Along with that, they sometimes practiced reading and writing on wax-coated boards, performed arithmetic with pebbles, and read scrolls instead of books. So forget modern homework. Roman children worked through sums with stones and wrote on wax tablets instead of paper. Moreover, in affluent families, private education was a privilege sometimes provided by highly educated slaves who served as tutors. These instructors taught not only academics, but also the refinement and discipline prized in Roman society. But for families of more modest means, schooling took on a very different character. Formal education was available, but it required payment. Thus, unlike today's classrooms, poor Roman students gathered in small groups at a tutor's house to get education. And in poorer households without the means to hire a tutor, parents themselves assumed the role of teacher. Today, structured schooling, career choices, and independence are accessible to everyone, but Roman education was dictated by tradition, social class, and financial status. Just imagine growing up knowing that your opportunities depended entirely on status or gender, with no room for personal ambition or deviation from societal expectations. Around the 5th hour of the day, Romans had their prandium, a light midday meal that served as a quick snack rather than a full feast. Today, lunch is a leisurely break, eaten whenever convenient. In Rome, it was a scheduled ritual, more about structure than preference. Typically enjoyed around noon, prandium was a modest mix of bread, leftovers, cheese, or fruit, served quickly either at home or on the move. In bustling urban centers, many residents opted to take their lunch from nearby taverns or street vendors, or they might stop by a thermopolium or pipina. These establishments functioned much like modern fast food restaurants, offering quick, ready-to-eat meals to the city's diverse inhabitants. Think of them as ancient street food stalls. No fancy menus, just sustenance on the go. However, dining at prandium wasn't only about nourishment. It was a moment of social exchange in a society built on relationships and patronage. Lunch wasn't just a meal. It was another way to reinforce status and connections. And as citizens hurried to enjoy their midday snack, they were participating in a daily tradition that, though modest, still shaped the rhythm of Roman life. So, unlike today's flexible mealtimes, Romans adhered to strict schedules where lunch was a structured necessity rather than a personal choice. Modern diners pick a restaurant, check reviews, and eat at their convenience. Romans, they followed time-honored customs, eating when expected rather than when hungry. After the midday meal, Romans indulged in long afternoons filled with leisure and entertainment, breaking free from the structured rhythm of their daily obligations. But here is the difference. Modern leisure revolves around streaming, social media, and fitness routines. Roman entertainment? It meant watching fierce gladiator battles where survival was never guaranteed. The Colosseum hosted legendary fights where warriors clashed in front of roaring spectators, their fates decided by combat and the whims of the audience. So unlike today's sports or cinema, Roman spectacles embraced violence as part of the thrill. And on quieter days, Romans turned to simpler amusements. Gambling was widespread, and physical games served as both recreation and training. Dice games and casual competitions were popular, but a visit to the bathhouse was equally significant. However, these baths weren't just for relaxation, they were centers for conversation, business deals, and even political maneuvering. So overall, unlike today, Roman leisure was deeply rooted in tradition and public spectacle. And when night fell over ancient Rome, the once bustling streets turned into silent, shadowy passageways filled with unseen dangers. In today's world, streetlights and security cameras keep us moving safely after dark. Romans, however, stepped into the darkness relying on fire and fortune to guide their way. The wealthier citizens had an advantage. They traveled with torch-bearing slaves, ensuring their path home was illuminated and free of trouble. These attendants weren't just holding fire, they were the difference between reaching home safely and becoming a target in the unpredictable Roman streets. But for the less fortunate, navigating the city at night was a far riskier task. With only the dim glow of the moon and scattered stars for guidance, every step was taken with hesitation, every turn a potential threat. So unlike today's cities, where technology and modern infrastructure create a sense of security, Rome existed in a world where darkness meant danger. Living without streetlights or instant help would be unimaginable for modern individuals, used to constant visibility and protection. Thus, from the rigid dawn routines to the treacherous nights, life in ancient Rome was built on discipline, hierarchy, and an unrelenting need for survival. Every meal, every interaction, and every choice was dictated by tradition, power, or the sheer necessity of staying alive. Could you endure it? Maybe. Would you want to? Not a chance. So the next time your phone battery dies or you complain about traffic, just remember, you're not wrapping yourself in an 18-foot toga, navigating Roman streets without streetlights, or pleading for patronage just to eat. Thanks for time traveling with us. If you enjoyed this ancient meets modern breakdown, hit that subscribe button. After all, you've already won the lottery by living in an era where gladiators aren't your Friday night entertainment.